Hey guys, this is the first stream I've done, kind of for the public for a little while. I've actually put this onto YouTube as well. I know sometimes I get a few issues with the TradingView setup, so I've put it on both. Right, obviously, if you're on TradingView and something kind of cuts out, the link to my YouTube is down in the signature. So look, in the grand scheme of things, right? I know a lot of you follow me for Bitcoin and kind of the overall Bitcoin kind of situation, position. I guess it kind of comes back down to two things, right? I think for some people who might watch the first 30 seconds, kind of lose the attention span, and then kind of think, oh well, this guy's just bearish, or this guy's perma bearish. I just want to highlight kind of a couple of obvious points, and I think it's not about being bearish, right? I've been bullish for an awful long time, right? I've been in Bitcoin since 2011. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, the point being is with a 24, 25 years nearly in terms of my kind of my professional trading career, you also understand that these things sometimes need to kind of come back down. They need to breathe. They need to kind of mature. They need time to mature overall, right? They need that kind of, market goes up, market goes down. It's kind of part of the cycle. I think the one thing that's going to change more than anything that I've seen in the last maybe 6 to 7 years in this kind of Bitcoin move is that the institutional aspect of this will actually change cycle conditions, right? So we've already seen quite a big impact in terms of weekend volatility, weekend kind of activity overall. And I think we're going to start seeing a little bit more of this, right? It's that kind of compression before any major move, any major kind of directional shift. Now, there's a couple of things that I just want to cover and kind of clarify, right? So, first things first, this isn't bearish, this isn't bad news, this isn't doom and gloom, this isn't Bitcoin to zero, right? But it's also not Bitcoin to 100K or $1 million or $190 million. I read somewhere that some guy had actually kind of quoted. Look, I think the point is you really need to just look out, right? You really need to kind of zoom out, look at the bigger picture, the wider kind of perspective. BlackRock and these other ETF kind of providers, these guys are not coming in to make a bunch of retail traders rich, right? It's not their business model. It's not the way that it's been. It's not the way it's going to be. And, this time is no different than any other time, right? Now, in the grand scheme of things, a couple of things that, I look back on and I think to myself, wow, if I kind of knew what I knew now, back kind of when, then how different things would be, in terms of how you see this kind of playing itself out, right? So where we are right now, we kind of at this kind of nothingness, right? People are claiming, this is massively bullish and off to the moon. Guys, we still, 26K under the current all-time high, right? That's not really, a massive boost of confidence based on, 11, 12 ETFs being approved. Now, another factor that was mentioned the other day was this Bitcoin multiplier, right? Now, for me, there's kind of an element of concern to this, right? Now, although it might be there, it might be a fact that I know it's kind of still a kind of discussed topic. The major issue is, right, when something moves up in a bull market, right, the multiplier effect can actually be seen, in terms of the acceleration, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that every dollar in equals, a number of dollars out, right? I mean, there's one article I wrote, I read the other day, and some guy had claimed that, the Bitcoin multiplier is 118. And you think, well, hang on, right? If it's $118 input for every dollar that goes in, why isn't the price already at, $1 trillion, right? The reality is just understanding, right? Now, for a lot of new traders, some of the economic factors, right? Some of the I suppose the nuances around trading, understanding kind of the bigger picture. These things can be very difficult to grasp, right? The kind of the average Joe is not going to know the difference between, a dovish or a hawkish tone, right? These kinds of, lingo, these terms in terms of this from an investor's perspective, from a financial, professional's perspective. These things are not what, your grandmother wanting to buy Bitcoin is going to understand, right? So a lot of the news, a lot of the media in general is kind of there to confuse the relative kind of retail investor, the relatively novice investor overall. Now, if you look at kind of just bullish sentiment, right? I think you just got to be realistic. Right? I think if we're looking at bearish sentiment, again, realistic, right? You're not saying, hey, well, Bitcoin has to come down to, 12K. Bitcoin doesn't have to go to 100K. Bitcoin can stay in this range for the next 3 years, right? And no problem, no issue overall, right? So what I want to do is just share a couple of things and just kind of reiterate, what I'm seeing, kind of why I'm seeing, right? So let's start with this one. This particular post here, right? I've talked about volume profile, right? Now I've gone from swing low to swing high in terms of the volume profile, right? Now, the one thing that this is actually currently printing is the majority of the volume is down low, right? We ultimately moved on up with the kind of the fake hype, right? This kind of move. Let me see if I got the volume profile on there as well. Increase in volume as obviously we start to increase. The multiplier effect and so on, right? So, kind of the argument is not really valid to use against yourself, right? Now, this isn't the first bit or the only bit that I'm kind of slightly concerned about, right? If we zoom out to a much bigger time frame, we actually have this lingering over us, right? In terms of a monthly move, we've kind of capped, which wouldn't be a surprise to see a wick fill and then a bigger drop, right? We've clearly got an awful lot of liquidity sitting in and around this range, but I also feel we have a lot still left untapped in this area, right? If we're talking about moves that take us all the way back to, 25K, for example, a move like that would give us enough kind of momentum, enough fuel in the tank to allow the rally to be sustainable over 100K, right? At the moment, I have two kind of major scenarios, right? There was three up until the kind of the black big news hype kind of boost out and whatever we want to go, right? So if I come back to a smaller time frame, let's come back to a weekly time frame, right? And what I want to do is I'm going to get rid of the stochastic for now. I'm going to show you a couple of things. So first things for me, right, is this particular move was the move that I talked about in terms of the accumulation move. Right? This was what I really wanted to happen, right? I wanted this price to come in. We get this kind of move in, right? Here, I would have loved to have seen this, followed by this, followed by this, and then this, right? This would have given us a potential second move down to allow us then to start doing something proper, right? This would have been the ideal, one type of scenario, right? Then we would have potentially pulled back for maybe a 2, right? And then ultimately, we can go off and up to the moon, right? So this is the one thing that I really wanted to see. Unfortunately, when we broke out of this level here, right, you can allow a couple of $1,000 because it's Bitcoin, the number of eyes on Bitcoin and so on. But after we started breaking, 35 plus, it just become a little bit kind of silly in terms of what we would expect to see from a larger accumulation move, right? So that was the first move. That would have been the kind of the preference. The idea would have been to come back down, kind of accumulate a little bit more, and then that giving us kind of fuel to go, right? These companies like BlackRock and Vanguard, right? These guys are professional money makers, right? If you think that this is only them buying Bitcoin, right, you're kind of more naive than I give you credit for, right? You have to understand how how the dynamics work, right? You got lots of different things surrounding Bitcoin that you don't see in other markets, right? In terms of miners selling off, you've got obviously early stage investors, you've got institutional players kind of playing in an unregulated pot, right? This is again, this is kind of a really interesting factor, right, in the grand scheme of things. So these are all the kind of things that you need to be at least a little bit cautious of, right? Now, I've talked about this particular move. Let me kind of find this back when, right? This one here. I talked about this in September 2022. Now, this was the one thing that I kind of hoped we didn't get, right? And the reason for this is that I'd said back then, this is one of the reasons I keep saying, nothing's changed, right? Nothing's changed, because nothing's changed to what I've already said, right? Until this market kind of gives me confidence that, hey, we are off to break new all-time highs. Nothing's changed, right? At the moment, I don't feel that, right? The reason for this is when I called this particular move here, right, to come to the upside, I would have loved to have seen, right, this kind of region, 32.9, right, 33, 35 at a push, right? This would have been the optimal area for another move down, right? Basically a smaller B. The smaller B would have brought us back into the range, right, back down for a kind of a clustered C. And that would have allowed us then for a kind of more aggressive one, right? And that more aggressive one could have put us, 50K plus before a move back down. Right? That move back down, maybe back into the 30K region, 25 to 30 realistically, which meant, a much stronger impulsive move overall. And this was the reason that I said, I didn't want this to be the scenario that actually plays itself out. Now, there's one other thing that I guess still sits here, right, in terms of a bigger picture. So what I want to do is I want to go back kind of in time in terms of explaining some of these, right? And this particular post for me is the one that kind of makes the most sense, right? If I'm talking to anybody, maybe someone new to Bitcoin, someone that's asked me about crypto or don't really have a handle on crypto, this is a way that I break this down, right? From, early on through to kind of end of 2017, early 2018, you're actually seeing, predominantly this is a play thing, right? This was, when I first bought Bitcoin, it probably took me about 3 days to actually kind of clear the transaction. It was such an awkward thing to wrap your head around. It wasn't as readily available as it is now, right? Now, obviously, from 2018 to kind of now, you saw a lot more kind of evolution in technologies kind of supporting Bitcoin, right? Kind of built on kind of platform-based technologies. Now, one of the things I remember quite well, this was a test that I'd done around probably 2017, 2018 time. It was a company called WireX. WireX had this kind of prepaid Bitcoin debit card, and it was one of the first probably in the marketplace. There possibly are others, that predate it, but this was one of the first things I saw, and one of the first things that I actually kind of got my hands on, really early on. And again, kind of similar thing. It was, I'd done a little test. I kind of moved, $100. I bought Bitcoin through the regular channels, kind of moved it into this WireX wallet. Long story short, I ended up going to the ATM to test this out. I've actually got the receipt that I printed out from the ATM just to kind of show the transaction back around this time. And, after moving $100 kind of from A to B to C to D, which, took me kind of hours and hours and hours on end waiting for these transactions to clear, I actually was left with something like $46 based on the fees, right? Now, these are all things that kind of holding Bitcoin back for me, right? These are the kind of things that need to be kind of fleshed out and kind of sorted out before you have some real intrinsic value and the growth can kind of grow based on the value, right? So as we then kind of jump forward, right, what I was seeing, my background in the venture capital space, I've worked with angels, I've worked with private equity firms, hedge funds, and so on. And one of the things that I was seeing, especially in kind of events, right, when you meet new people for the first time, Bitcoin and kind of crypto / blockchain, it was probably more blockchain at the time. Blockchain was kind of the big buzzword, in terms of the investment space, right? This was kind of fintech out, blockchain in, and this was the transition period for me, right? So what you could actually see happening around this time was people using Bitcoin as a kind of sentiment indicator for blockchain kind of investments, blockchain kind of projects. And the general idea was, if Bitcoin went up for a couple of days, you're more likely to get your startup in the blockchain space funded. If Bitcoin went kind of sideways or a little bit down for a couple of days, people weren't so readily kind of offering kind of money in terms of venture capital, angel investment, and so on, right? So this was kind of the first sign that there was interest there, but it wasn't kind of real tradable instrument, right? It was kind of interest in the space rather than interest kind of in terms of kind of a tradable asset, right? Then obviously we kind of fast forward. I'd probably say this was, more towards the later end, right? So kind of late, maybe Q2 2018, right away through to kind of the bottom of the market, right? In this sense. This for me was when you kind of had these conversations with, again, kind of private equity firms. You're having conversations around hedge funds and maybe the larger operators, right? The kind of the limited partners or the kind of funds of funds investors from a institutional perspective, right? Now, when these guys start to kind of, show their cards, this is when things really got kind of interesting, right? So at this particular point, as we kind of started to rally out, I kind of sold off a lot of Bitcoin here, right? This was kind of early on for me. This was kind of, right, something's happening. I'm just, not quite sure what, right? So I ended up kind of exiting quite a lot at this particular point from I suppose the first purchase down here, right? Then ultimately we start to rally up. Now, the one thing happened for me here is I got kind of out of my obligation in terms of not being able to talk and discuss kind of investment strategies and techniques and so on. And I was kind of almost free reign in terms of putting kind of, info out there. So the one thing that really kind of hit me, right, was this particular move, this reaccumulation move, this reaccumulation kind of area sector, right? And, I'd actually put this post out then about this particular move, right? So this was around, 32K ish, this kind of region, right? And it was almost the first time I'd saw the, any instrument kind of unfold in front of your eyes, right? And, although I've used Wyckoff and Elliott and so on for a long time, it was the first time seeing a kind of a hobbyist type, move down here on the left through to this kind of angel and speculation type investment vehicle over here, all the way through to kind of the real first institutional ramp up. And then this kind of reaccumulation, right? Now, I think this is where, for me, a lot of the influencers, a lot of people got this kind of massively wrong kind of moving forward, is that we actually saw the first sign. And if you look kind of very closely, you see this candle in you, right? This was the first kind of buyer's climax to AR. That was actually kind of, on full scale, right? You come down one scale, you'll see that, it's kind of smacking you in the face, right? So it was this particular move that I started talking about distribution, right? And again, no surprise when I called this move, people were saying, "Oh, you're stupid. You know nothing. This isn't going to happen. Bitcoin's going to 100K. All the same old shit, right?" We ultimately fall down, right? We go down, we go up, we go down, we go up, right? This move was something like $2,500 off the kind of projection here, right? But ultimately, we come in to the level that we expected it to come in for, right? This was something that we kind of, pre-posted. And the general idea is that we then rally back up to 5, right? Now, as we started moving this move up, there was a couple of things that, again, kind of showed its hand very early on, right? This was the first thing, right? And the reason I want to go through all of this is it'll help you understand what we're doing right now, right, in terms of the current price. Now, for you guys that have followed me, you guys who know me, you're going to know all of this, right? Because I've told you this kind of time and time and time again, right? But it's really important to understand the logic behind every aspect of this move, right? So what I was seeing at this particular point was something that, again, kind of put a little bit of fear, put a little bit of doubt in terms of where the move would actually go to. So in the August, this was August 2021, I talked about this particular move, right? And why we'd actually go 3 down to 4, up to 5, right? But my concern was, as this was meaning a monthly 3 potentially, right, bigger picture, I think we're going to catch all these buyers at 65K and we're going to see 40K again very quickly. Now, no surprise there in terms of what happened, right? This was the August. Let me just put a line in terms of the 24th of August. Right? This was the August there, roughly there, right? What do? We literally drop one down, right? And we carry on through. Let me put a line at the 65k. This was a 65k, right? And we basically grab liquidity, right? This is what they call a liquidity sweep, right? Now, the reason for this is a kind of fuel for the move down. Right? Let's see where we say, 40k was the kind of level, right? There's the 40k. For me, 40k is the center, right? This was the kind of the zone here, right? This was the center of that half decent move. Right? This is where the volume cluster took place, right? The writing was already on the wall, right? And it was there for a long time before the move kind of up even took place, right? Now, the issue that I have in terms of where we are, right, and this is where I'm coming into now in terms of where we are right now. I would have loved to have seen this move here, right, given us 32k-ish, right, given us a nice accumulation move. Right? Unfortunately, we had this kind of rally out on the fake news, right, and we've done pretty much nothing ever since. So the main issue that I have in terms of people's lack of understanding in this, right, is I look down at posts like I've posted, right? I've talked about how crazy some of these numbers are, and these are where I get the comments from. Oh, what about the multiplier? Now just think, right? We've had $7 billion coming in to 11, 12 new ETFs. We've had Grayscale pushing out just over 6 billion, right? So there's an increase by $1 billion, right? $1 billion in terms of coming in. We then have the multiplier, right? So let's just kind of be realistic and say, well, maybe the multiplier is a 4x, right? Just times that by 4. We've got $5 billion roughly, right, coming in. I think it's just over a million, 1.2 something billion, right, in terms of what would be left after the Grayscale kind of move out, right? Now, what I've done here, I've actually put together, let me see if I can find where I put it. I had somewhere. Oh no, I didn't actually save it. Maybe it's this. No, this was this one here. No. Okay, I'll show you this on the next stream, right? So what I actually done was I thought I saved it as one of my favorites. No, I clearly didn't. Okay, sorry. So what I done was I basically took I took a number of, I think it was 10 that I was able to do within TradingView. I took a number of the ETFs, right? And basically worked out that we currently trading around 30% discounted to the opening day, right? So obviously this for me right now is that we are trading, kind of technically discounted in that sense, which again makes a lot of sense in terms of where we are. And I think, for the market, the ETFs are a good thing kind of moving forward, right? But I think it's not something that people thought would be immediate, right? So what I've got right now is if we look at the macro versus the micro kind of view, right? Now, I always take from a moving a downtrend, uptrend, right? Is I always move until, the line touches, right? So for me right now, we've got a pretty big move, right? I'm just going to put CTRL, copy that line, right? And put this, there. That for me is a pretty decent channel, right? Just kind of, regular kind of idea, right? For me, it's a pretty decent channel, right? That's kind of, I've copied parallel lines. Now, the next thing I have is if I stick, say, a regression trend from here to the top, which means actually we've got a relatively small uptrend in a much larger downtrend currently. Right? Now, that's not to say, like I said, I'm bearish. That's not to say this is, what I'm getting at. I'm just kind of saying, look, look at some of these obvious factors, right? Look at some of these obvious kind of moves. So going back to what I talked about in terms of this particular move, right? This was kind of where I put, the obvious B, right? I've marked this up as the obvious B. Right? I'm not talking about we have to go deep for a C, right? I kind of feel we could easily ping, let's put this on, where's the lines there, right? We could easily ping double bottom. Let me just put that a bit thicker, for example. Right? And this is not saying what we have to do. We've clearly got a couple of areas in and around in terms of liquidity sat under there, right? Which is why the box is there. Right? I kind of personally feel we've potentially got something like this to come into. Right? That's going to be realistic. I think the time factor is going to be more important than the price in this particular move. Right? So, with all this being said, I kind of feel we still, after all of the ETFs being approved, we are still 26k, more or less, 26k and a little bit of change underneath that all-time high. Right? There's no real factor there from volume, right, to momentum, to the monthly stochastic. Right? I'm going to stick the CVD indicator on. Let's show you something else. Right? And these are the main factors for me. Right? These are the main points that I'm currently seeing. Right? We look at something like this. We zoom out. We have clear bullish momentum here. I'll stick that in as green and green. Right? We have clear bullish momentum here and here. Clear. What do we have in these other places? We've actually got momentum down, right, in the red zone for a build up to the upside. Right? As we rally, we've got momentum up, volume up, price up. Right? What we're actually seeing right now is almost the opposite. We've actually got a build up in momentum as the price is dropping. Right? And then as the price starts to rally, momentum drops. Okay, so this for me at the moment is not screaming, bullish to the moon, 100k, 300k, $1 million, worth of where I think Bitcoin's going to go. So, overall, my sentiment is still pretty much nothing's changed, right? I've talked about this from a realism perspective. So my last post, this one here, right? This obviously is hard for a lot of people to, one, comprehend, and two, want to kind of believe or look at, right? So they'd rather click off and either call something bullish or go and find somebody else who's saying yeah, we are bullish the same as you, right? What they kind of fail to see is this isn't me being bearish. This isn't a bearish move. This isn't a bearish stream. It isn't a bearish post, right? This is realism, right? This is me being realistic in terms of a lot of things I'm putting a lot of logic behind for you guys, right? Now, part of the reason I do this and part of the reason that I enjoy, this from an educational perspective, this from a logical perspective, right, is I've been in the space an awful long time, right? I'm sat on Bitcoin, I'm sat on XRP. I couldn't care less if we go up, down, or sideways for the next 10 years. It doesn't bother me one bit, right? All I'm trying to point out is if you're thinking you can stick, a couple of $1,000s into Bitcoin and, whoa, that's going to make you rich. You just need to understand the market dynamics a little bit deeper. So let me give you a clue, right? BlackRock's biggest ETF, right? This is an ETF that they launched in 2001. So we're talking 22, 23 years ago today. They currently are holding 354 billion in that ETF. That's over 20 plus years. Right? That's the first thing. The next thing when it comes to ETFs, let's scroll down, this one here, right? We had in 2021, which was I think the biggest level in terms of price, we had just over $10 trillion, right, managed inside of ETFs. And the numbers clearly dropped 2022. I haven't found the new updated version of this yet. Right? We're talking about 8,552 products across the board. Right? Kind of a scary fact in terms of what needs to go into 12 current ETFs for us to have these kinds of figures, these kinds of numbers going in. Even if you do stick 118 multiplier, right? more likely a 3 or 4 multiplier, we're still going to struggle in terms of the kinds of levels, right? Now, this one, I was informed this was slightly out of date, but I think it's only out of date by 2 weeks. So the general idea is, yes, we might have had this come down a little bit, and yes, this might have gone up a little bit, but we're not quite ready yet. And I think this is kind of the whole point. I know this is a long post, right? It's a long stream. But the reality is, we're not quite ready yet for the turnaround. This is leverage funds. This is the kind of, the only piece of COT data you need in terms of Bitcoin, right? The asset managers are long now. We've known now. We've been long for a long time, right? When we look at these individual moves, these individual swings, right? I've tried to break this down, best as I possibly can, right? We've talked about things like the miners, right? We've talked about the miners being, kind of in this kind of sale mode, and I've highlighted this, right? The point or the thing here was, the miners basically dropped to zero straight after the halving. Well, yeah, look, and when the miners drop to zero, what does the price do? The clues are kind of written on the wall, guys, right? We've got this so-called multiplier that has done practically nothing, right? We've still got the Grayscale account, selling off. We've got institutional players in general outside of the ETF selling off. The ETF is a stabilizer in terms of price, and it's for a longer term growth. These guys will have 10 years, 15 years, 20 years as a potential return on investment in their target eyes, right? They kind of their sights. This is where these guys are aiming towards, right? We then have, all these different factors, all these different things, right? These are just, all the things that you need to take into account, right? Even if this is kind of off scale and we need, let's just say a factor of 4, we still need another, this is nearly touching on 10 trillion, right? Without the multiplier. Let's add a factor of 4 multiplier just to be, somewhat realistic, right? At this particular point, we're going to still need 2.5 trillion coming in with the multiplier, right? Just to get to 500k. These are the kinds of things that you need to just keep in the back of your mind, right? So again, for me, this isn't, doom and gloom. This isn't, hey, we're off to the moon, right? This is just, hopefully a healthy dose of realism, right? In terms of where we are, what I'm seeing, like I said, right at the start, this was only, 2-3 days ago. The volume profile kind of speaks the same language, right? We're kind of going nowhere slow right now, right? And therefore, I just advise, a bit of caution. Take your time, right? Don't stress about up or down too far, right? The reality is you've got to make it personal to you, right? You've got to understand that if you were going to DCA into this, be prepared for a 20-year growth curve. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But don't expect to put in, $1,000 and turn this into, $100 million next week. I think for me, a lot of the crypto space, that time has kind of been and gone. I think that there's still some opportunities, but these kinds of opportunity, guys, these are lottery punts, right? These are the kinds of things where, I remember putting my first $500 into a stock, and within 24 hours, it was worth 45,000. And this was like such an incredible feeling. It was, how do I turn $500 into 40,000? Wow, And I know it's like a bug. It's like a drug, right? However, if you understand how the market works and the dynamics of the market, the economics behind the market, right? It'll be an awful lot easier for you to manage expectations. And I think this is where I'm coming from in terms of clearly just manage your expectations. Don't expect too much from the market, right? Kind of enjoy your time. Don't risk more than you can afford to lose, and all the kind of good, positive advice that I can give. And I guess just for me, look, guys, this comes back to keep it real, right? Be realistic, keep it real, and, just be careful out there, right? So anyway, hope you enjoyed this one. Sorry it was a longer one, but I thought it was worthwhile putting it out there. So again, thanks, guys. See you on the next stream.